So let's talk about basics of FPS games. This is a precursor or introduction to what will eventually turn into a How to Beat 1999 mode. If you're having trouble with it, this guide will definitely help you. So this is just going to cover basic things in a game. Alright, so the first thing you should be aware of is positioning. Before you even focus on aiming or any kind of like tactics, you need to be aware of basic thing, the most fundamental thing, your position. Where are you in the middle of a fight? If you are shooting enemies, the enemies are shooting you. Being out in the open like this is a horrible idea. You're going to get shot. If you're by a wall and the enemies are on the other side of the wall, that's a good position because then you can attack them when you want, and there are things you can do specifically to deal with them. If you are like sprinting from one position to another, that can be fine as long as enemies are distracted, or maybe you know you won't take that much damage for whatever reason. So position is extremely important. So right now we're about to approach a huge open-ended fight, and what some people might be tempted to do is to run in and start fighting. However, there's nothing telling you can't stand here and start pulling enemies away. I see there's a bunch of enemies grouped up, so let's hit them with an AoE possession trap, killing all of those, and then we'll just kind of kite. So they all killed themselves, and we have an ally. So we can actually use this as an opportunity to push up to cover here. So I see there's a dude up there, so I'm going to pick him off. I'm still mostly behind cover, and I can peek as needed. Something's shooting me over here. Enemy pushing me right now. Hit him with some crows. So the main important thing here is these boxes are essentially making this fight trivial. Because I'm behind cover, if enemies want to approach me, they can. However, I am at the advantage, right? Like, they have to approach me. Like, the AI generally will do this. Another dude looks like he might be up there. Or maybe that's just my vision. So you can see here that this is a really good position. It's essentially just a bunch of boxes, and just by moving back and forth, I can peek, I can kill enemies, assuming I can see their heads. He's like phasing for some reason. But yeah, so the most fundamental thing is your position. So you might be tempted to run out in the open, and this can work, and I'll go over pushing, which is another part of position. So there's like a turret up here, so that's kind of a problem. So now I'm in like a bad position. For the most part. I can kind of defend this, but... Whoops, accidentally. I did not mean to use that. I can kind of defend this position, but it's going to be kind of difficult. Looks like that missed for some reason. So what I have to do is basically keep some kind of terrain in front of me so that turret can't just DPS me. And I'm just going to shoot these dudes. And then right now I'm still holding a position like a box. Just like looking for an opportunity. Alright, so now I'm getting pushed by a specific enemy, so I'm actually going to retreat in here. Use sprint. This guy will chase me. We'll actually go up further. Try to go for some headshots. Might as well pull the shotgun out, because this guy's going to come pretty close. Alright, so even though you might feel like you're stuck in a location, you can always move, you can always run around the battlefield, you can always run to different parts of cover, but the easiest way to beat this game in 1999 mode, especially if you're having trouble with this game, is to play passively. In this game, you aren't really rewarded for being active because enemies are hit scan, so you can be rewarded for being active if you do it correctly, but there's a lot of hit scan enemies, and your best bet is to hold cover and to pick them off. There's more advanced like tactics you can use to deal with enemies, and I'm going to be going over those soon. But the most important thing to your success, especially if you're not extremely accurate, or if you're having a hard time, and you're getting like almost killed constantly, or you are getting killed constantly, is to be aware of where you're at in the fight. So if you're out in the open and there's enemies on all sides, and enemies have multiple routes to get to you, that they can like hit you from the sides, you're essentially setting yourself up for failure, where you are opening yourself up to damage you really shouldn't be taking. So that's the first thing, is where are you at positionally. The second thing in terms of position is flanking. So this is something enemies will try to do to you in this game, as well as something that you should generally try to do to enemies. Flanking is when an enemy is looking at you or looking in a direction. Let's say I'm like here, I'm some enemy. Flanking would be attacking them from the sides or the back. So in this case, let's say for a fact there's enemies waiting by this and they think you're over here and then the doors close, right? If you sprint all the way over here and there's no enemies on the way there, and then you suddenly appear here, the enemy that is now no longer behind cover and exposed that's looking this way is an easy kill. Because you have the jump on them, you can also poke them or peek at them from cover, and you can approach them in this way so that you're actually flanking them from like the back. And that would be very effective, especially in 1999 mode. So you can't always flank enemies, but very often when you play this game, you are fighting in an arena. And in these arenas, there are always alternate routes, and you generally never want to be in the middle of the arena. The reason for this is you will get flanked yourself. So that box position worked in the beginning because the only way enemies can get up to me is if they come up the staircase. There is no position over here, and even if they would have stood over here, they would have had to run all the way over here to start shooting at me. And even then, there should be a spot in here where I'm like concealed. So like right here. So they can kind of flank me, but the AI generally won't do that in this game. They'll look for like simple things. They won't do things like that. But if this was an online game, obviously they might. So this position was good. And then I sprinted up here, which is actually a bad position. So I was just kind of showing you the difference. Like even though you have cover, you're like under. You're essentially being pressured, right? You're being pressured by this turret. There's enemies over here, so you've essentially put yourself in the middle of two things. So I can't even be visible over here because this turret's going to keep shooting me. I did try to possess it, but it looked like it hit the railing or something, which does happen a lot. You have to like possess above things like that and it'll like go down into it usually. But then I was forced to like hold this and kill these, or else I was basically dead. And now an alternate thing I could have done is like sprints to here, and then sprints to here, or just made a dash for it, and I probably would have been fine. But there's a huge difference between an open cover where you can be flanked and like sturdy cover, I guess we'll call it, or like cover that's more stable, that's more like defensive. So that's the difference between those positionally. So for flanking, so for this fight in particular, as soon as you enter this fight, there's a group of enemies here, so I AoE possess them to kill them. There's like a few stragglers in the back. There's an enemy up here. And there's also a turret over here. However, this tent blocks the turret until you get to around here, and then the turret becomes a problem. So in the beginning of this fight, one of the easiest things you can do is actually to come over here. So now all the enemies have to approach you from one area, and the turret's not an issue. The only problem with this area is if you're like reloading and you get pushed by too many enemies, you could get killed. But you could pick them off using the staircase as cover and like this post as cover, and like attack them as they're coming towards you. Alternatively, you can push this side. This side might be a little bit safer to push, so you just do something like this, and then go in here, and now you have cover, and then you can just sprint over here. And then if you hold this position, enemies can push you from this side or this side. So if you're good at monitoring angles or holding angles and paying attention, you should be fine. Alternatively, you can come into like a room like this and deal with the enemies that way. So they have to like, they'd be coming in through most of this door, but you'd have at least like a choke point. Like if you hold something like this, for example, this could be viable as well. Same thing with this. So a lot of positions can be viable. It depends on how you hold them and how good you are at monitoring things. So the next thing I'm going to go over is distractions. So in BioShock Infinite, if you headshot an enemy, nearby enemies will actually stagger. So this just getting a headshot and popping an enemy's head can cause a distraction if they're near that foe. So headshotting an enemy near other enemies can actually be used as a form of crowd control. And it's quite good too. The reason it's good is because it's easy to do for the most part, especially if you use like Shock Jockey. Okay. There's other distractions like crows. Devil's Kiss can distract enemies for like a small period of time. Possession can distract enemies. They'll generally turn and shoot at the enemy that is possessed. So all of these things can be useful, and all of these things can help you in combat. So these are just like the core fundamental things. All right, now I'm going to go over some other things that are very basic. This is true of all FPS games. So those are peeking and holding angles. So you might have noticed that this position worked pretty well because all the enemies had to engage me where I could see them. Like, the AI isn't smart enough to like run all the way over to here and start shooting me. There's also kind of like cover here, so you could kind of hold this. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm holding an angle, right? Like, this is something you'll probably hear in like people talking about like CSGO gameplay when they're like watching like doorways and entrances and stuff like that. So holding an angle is when you have vision of an area and you can see most or all of the enemies, or you're like in an important position. So in this case, I was holding like this angle here off to the side. Now, I would never stand out in the opening so you'd instantly die. So you have to use cover or use vigors in a very aggressive way. And you can do that. Like, you can actually play 1999 mode out in the open if you're extremely good and accurate and precise and consistent. But if you're just trying to beat it and you're having a hard time, your best bet is to play methodically, use tactics, and be cautious because you do die quickly. So you would want to hold angles, move logically. So like, for example, you could fight this whole fight back here, drawing as many enemies into this open area as you want and just laying waste to them. You could hold an angle like this, force enemies to engage you on this diagonal here. You can hold, like, almost anything's an angle. Like, this could be an angle too. This is some cover, but you're going to be getting shot because you're exposed. But it's just like, so cover, angles, you know. Another important thing is peeking. So peeking is when you peek and then hide. Peek and then hide. And then we combine with shooting, peek shot, peek shot, peek shot, peek shot. All right, so the reason this is really strong, this is also done in CS very commonly. The reason for this is you are limiting the potential of you getting hit by hiding your hitbox, and you are exposing yourself for fractions of a second to land shots. AI in this game doesn't react extremely quickly. So generally, if you peek and keep shooting things, they won't be hitting you, and they won't even really be shooting at you because they wait for you to be visible for about like a little bit under a second, but it's like they usually don't have enough time to react to things like this. And if you know where they are, so like, let's say for an example, an enemy's head is right here, you can just shoot when it's right on his head instead of, you know, just standing out in the open shooting at him. So this will prevent you from getting shot. This is a core thing that'll help you in any game, especially CS. In Counter-Strike, it's very common to peek shoot, and it's also very common to hold angles. In Counter-Strike, there's no sprinting, and when you get hit, you get tagged, so you move slower. So in that game especially, it's important. But for this game, we're going to borrow these basic tactics to easily beat 1999 mode. Okay, so let's talk about aiming. So aiming is extremely important in an FPS game, obviously. It's important in every FPS game. So what is an easy way to be more accurate? There actually is a way to be more accurate, and it's not like a scam. Like, there's not like some, oh, download this course or do this thing. So accuracy depends on your reflexes and your training, right? Like how many times you've done something, what your muscle memory is, and so on. However, there's ways you can kind of cheat it. So if you're not that accurate in FPS games and you want to get headshots, assuming that this is like a single player game, and multiplayer games it's harder to do things like this, but what you can do is you can lower your sensitivity and just hold angles and just like peek shot things. So you don't even have to aim, like, not, and maybe you don't want to lower your sensitivity. You don't even have to aim with your aiming. Like, let's say you just have this at head level and then you just click when it's on a dude's head. So this is strafe aiming. This is very commonly done in console FPS. Because it's kind of hard to aim with a joystick, so a lot of console FPS players will use strafe to help assist an aim or to help land accurate shots. So if something is already at head level and you're on like a flat surface, you can easily land headshots in this way. So that's one way to kind of cheat aiming. Another way to help with aiming is if your look sensitivity is too high, like mine. I would say to get a 360 is about, let me see, about like 5 or 6 inches for a 360 for my current sensitivity. So it's like It's on the higher end, but it's not like so low that I can't like quickly focus on something. So that's generally what I play at. But if you're having trouble aiming, lowering the sensitivity can greatly help you. And also try to keep your sensitivity the same among games. So if your sensitivity is generally 10 inches for your character to turn around, like in my case, it's around 6. There's like a specific spot on my mouse pad that I use as like a visual marker for this. I'll adjust the sensitivity so that every game I'm playing is like 6 inches for a 360. And I highly recommend you do this for whatever setting you want. Maybe it's 10 inches, whatever. If you want like lower sensitivity, it's going to take more mouse movement to, get a 360 or to aim. The 360 thing is just useful because you can kind of standardize your like look sensitivity between games. And this is only something I recently got into. So yeah, that's definitely going to help you. All right, the final thing I want to wrap up with is how long should you be visible to enemies? So this is a very basic thing that almost seems like not even a thing. Like it almost seems like this is like not even something you need to discuss. But when you actually watch people play a game, they don't even realize it. They're actually visible to enemies for like extended periods of time. And the main way you die in 1999 mode is by standing out in the open or being like visible to enemies for too long. So if your shields are down, obviously you should try to take cover and then like expect enemies to push you. So like in this case right now, you can kind of see I'm like passively moving to cover. And like after I killed that enemy, I just passively moved back to cover, anticipating that the enemies are going to try to kill me. So one thing you can do, pop out of cover, use a vigor, and then kill a dude. I loot as I push forward just as something to do. Alright, I think there's still enemies in here. I can hear them. Alright, there's a guy over there. Alright, so I know there's an enemy over there. There might be an enemy flanking me, so I'm going to run over to here so I can have visual on my blind spot in the flank, and I can push this if I want to. So I can see they're shooting over here. So when you're peeking, you don't want to peek like this. Like if there's an enemy here and an enemy here, you don't want to peek like this. You want to peek until you see an enemy. So you can like slow peek. And then when, he's about to return fire, I hide again. So I'm almost never visible to enemies, or I try not to be. I think this is just one enemy, so I'm just going to push him aggressively. So you don't always have to use ammo either. You can use like vigors and just melee. But you never want to be visible to enemies for too long, and if you are, you want to have distractions and crowd control. That is the entire point of me mentioning this. If you are visible to enemies for too long in 1999 mode, you're 100% dead. There's no getting around this. You will definitely die. What will happen is you'll just start getting shot from a random direction. There'll be an enemy you don't see. Because the enemies will flank you. They'll push your left and right flanks, and sometimes there's an enemy high up. So you have to be very aware of like what's around you in this game. And if you stand out in the open, you're visible for too long, you're probably going to die. Now, you can be very aggressive in this game. You don't have to be like passive. Like you can push enemies and be aggressive and push a flank. But generally, you want to push a flank. You don't want to push up the center, because if you crowd control some enemies in the center, the enemies on your flanks will generally not be crowd controlled by whatever CC you're using in the game, and you're just going to eat damage from the sides and die. So you want to, if you're going to be aggressive, you want to push flanks. This is true of almost every FPS game, even in like an online game. It's generally unwise to push up the center unless you have like an extremely good reason for doing so. And circumstances dictate this, but you can be aggressive. You just have to know what you're doing. So that wraps up the beginning parts of this series, I guess. Just going over some basic FPS fundamentals, position, flanking, distractions in the case of crowd control, peeking, things you can do to easily improve your aim just by using strafe to aim, or by reducing your look sensitivity, not being visible for too long. Obviously, if you're standing and trying to aim and shoot an enemy while they're shooting at you, you're going to be getting shot. So if you can kind of make a mental note of where they just were and kind of aim close so that when you peek, your aim is close to where you need to shoot, that's a thing that'll definitely help you. In this game, you have direct access to crowd control, so just using crows will help. It will help you land, line up shots on enemies. So a lot of different things can help. But yeah, that's it for this basics of FPS video. Thanks for checking us out, and I'll see you in another one.